Delivering milk to the local creamery is part of the traditional slow-moving action of the Irish countryside, as normal, inevitable and timeless as following the local football team or going to Sunday Mass. Like 350 more, the creamery at Feenagh in County Limerick is a cooperative, owned by the farmers themselves. One of the oldest co-op creameries, it dates back to 1891. About half of the farmers who deliver milk here are shareholders. For the rest, it's straight business, the business of selling their milk for the best price they can get. Not far away at Charleville in County Cork, the procedure is the same but on an enormous scale. For 1890, read 1970. For donkey carts, substitute milk tankers and a sophisticated technology. Here, 22 cooperatives from the Golden Vale area have federated to form a cooperative processing factory which can deal with 40 million gallons of milk a year. So here we have a situation in which a federation of 22 small and medium-sized creameries jointly control at Charleville a fine factory and processing plant. A plant which is efficiently run by highly qualified technocrats and managers. On the face of it, this would seem to be an admirable example of the cooperative movement keeping up with the times. But now it seems that this isn't enough. Recently, the thousands of farmer shareholders who have got a stake in Charleville have been circulated with this rather impressive-looking document, printed rather like a legal brief. And it's called A Document on the Proposals for Amalgamation of the Golden Vale Cooperative Societies. And in it, the bosses at Charleville invite the 22 local co-ops to vote themselves out of existence entirely and to amalgamate in an entirely new big co-op. In other words, it looks as though the bouncing Charleville baby now wants to swallow up its 22 rather elderly and perhaps economically feeble parents. This is a clear case of rationalization and centralization conflicting with local autonomy and tradition, of the demands of today's big dairy business running against the interests of those small and intimate creameries of the countryside. And it's against this background of debate in the Golden Vale that we will look at the agricultural cooperative movement in Ireland, at how it stands today, and at whether or not it has succeeded or failed in realizing the hopes of those idealists who founded the movement 3/4 of a century ago. The founding father of the movement, Sir Horace Plunkett, the son of Lord Dunsany, a wealthy landed Protestant gentleman from County Meath. His aim, to help the small farmers to help themselves, by using their co-ops to reduce their dependence on local merchants and gombeen men, a dependence which seriously threatens their independent way of life. Lord Monteagle was among Plunkett's most ardent supporters, as was the Jesuit professor, Father Finlay. Plunkett's John the Baptist was the dedicated R.A. Anderson, who travelled the country preaching the new gospel of cooperation. Everywhere he helped the farmers to found new co-ops. He remembered falling off his bicycle on his way to a meeting in Feenagh in 1891.
I got there on time, but rather breathless and covered with mud, had quite a good meeting and started the Feenagh Creamery.
A creamery which is still there 80 years later. The cooperative idea spread rapidly from its cradle in the Golden Vale area. The movement became a force in the land. By 1899 there were 374 cooperating societies. By 1914 over 1,000. But the depression after the First World War saw the movement decline. Today there are 346 such societies with an annual turnover of nearly £200 million. One of the early creameries was at Herbertstown. Martin O'Dwyer, now chairman of the Golden Vale, remembers being at the Herbertstown inaugural meeting.
Well, of course, it was very difficult. Sir Horace Plunkett was the principal enthusiast in the cooperative movement at the time, and it was he spread the idea and helped to spread the idea. But there was at that time, soon after the land campaign and fight against the landlords and all that, and there seemed to be some kind of suspicion, a kind of political, with the political parties, a kind of suspicion of the cooperative movement, that it would be to undermine the political position.
But Plunkett was determined to keep the Irish cooperative movement out of politics.
The less politics there is in business and the more business in politics, the better for both.
This philosophy of Plunkett's has been the policy of the cooperative movement all through the 80 years of its existence. When you were a young man, what did you hope for from the co-op movement?
Well, we hoped, of course, that it would, beyond the local creameries, we didn't go any further for ideas. You see, of course, the idea at the time of spreading into great big business, that was unthought of at the time. The most that was hoped for was that there'd be a creamery in every parish, and that it would take in the farmers' milk, and that way. Of course, it was years after when they began to develop into other things. It was only just for making butter at the time.
When did the feeling of community spirit, perhaps even a kind of socialism, come into it, or did it ever come?
I don't think it didn't ever come, actually. Not what I would have hoped for anyway, I think, you see.
Mr. Leahy, it rather surprises me and impresses me that you are only the third creamery manager here at Feenagh since 1891.
I suppose it would be somewhat surprising, but it's true.
On the whole, when you've worked all your life in the co-op movement, do you think on the whole that it has achieved any of its early objectives?
Well, of course, an ideal nearly always falls short of the original vision. But for all that, it has achieved quite a lot. I mean, it has come into the social fabric of the people. In fact, it has preserved in great measure the social fabric of the countryside. I think it has. As I say, it might have done more, but to that extent, I think it has been successful, that it has preserved the social fabric.
Yet it doesn't seem to be anything like as exciting and embracive a movement as the co-op movement is in countries like Denmark.
Well, that is true. You must remember that when the Danish cooperative movement started, hand in hand with it went a great system of education. Remember Bishop Grundtvig, and you heard about and read about the folk high schools.
Yes.
Well, they gave to Denmark, they gave cooperation in Denmark a ethos which I don't think the Irish effort ever acquired. Hand in hand with cooperation, it went this great educational program.
An elegant house in Dublin's Merrion Square was given to Horace Plunkett by his wealthy friends as a headquarters for the movement. Called the Plunkett House, it houses the movement's central body, the Irish Agricultural Organisation Society. The poet and visionary George Russell, A.E., worked for many years in the Plunkett House, editing a cooperative magazine, the Irish Homestead. The Irish Homestead reflected the genius of A.E. and greatly promoted the cooperative cause. A task which is now the responsibility of the IAOS Secretary, Patrick Kelly.
I feel that the present day position of the cooperative movement, that is the agricultural cooperative movement in Ireland, is far away beyond what any dreams that Sir Horace Plunkett could have in regard to its developments, in regard to the efficiency of its operation, and in particular putting all these things together in the benefits that it has brought to farmers.
It has been said that the cooperative movement in this country failed to emphasize the social objectives of cooperation and emphasized those of business and economic profit.
Well, the question of what social objectives are needs a good deal of definition. From our point of view here, as people who are interested in getting farmers to join into cooperative societies, we feel that there's very little good in talking about social aspects unless the economics of the situation is put right first. Now, from our point of view, the important social aspect in the countryside is to improve the lot of the people, and this can only be done by improving their income.
In recent years, the movement has been the subject of close study and appraisement. In 1964, the Department of Agriculture commissioned the Knapp Report, which had hard things to say about the movement. It found cooperative societies were too small, techniques and equipment out of date. There was not enough member involvement, and the societies were being run purely as businesses, forgetting the cooperative ideal. And the NAP report found too that the IAOS was admirable but old-fashioned in its structure and approach.
If I was to say very briefly what the purpose of the IAOS is, I would say it is primarily an educational, that we have an educational function. I think that this is true, and by and large, perhaps over the years, the necessity for this type of instruction was not clearly recognized. We felt that we knew what we were about here, and we rather assumed that farmers would understand the implications of what we were asking them to do. In recent years, however, we have recognized the necessity to have this more clearly defined, and for the past 5 or 6 years we have established an educational section in the IAOS, and the purpose of that section is to explain cooperative principles and, of course, cooperative practice to the farmers of the country as far as we can reach on them. We can only do the best we can, use the means at our disposal, which are limited enough. We must work through our cooperative societies, but even there, on an educational program, there's comparatively few that we can contact.
The NAP report also recommended rationalisation of the movement. It forecast amalgamations rather like that now planned by Golden Vale. The general manager of Golden Vale is Dave O'Loughlin. He has a very definite notion of what the cooperative movement is all about.
Primary motive is profit making for the farmers, and for the farmers to maximise the facilities that are here to their own benefits.
A lot of people think that there is a social motivation behind the cooperative movement.
Well, I've heard a lot about the social motivation, but I have never seen it translated into practical terms. To me, the social motivation is the generation of more income to the rural community.
The Golden Vale amalgamation scheme has been drafted by a committee of managers and chairmen of the 22 federated co-op societies, together with representatives of Charleville management and the IAOS. But the scheme means nothing until it's agreed by the members of each of the small societies, which up to now have been loosely federated but not amalgamated. At meetings throughout the area, management makes its case to the local shareholders, who now must make a crucial decision. Should they vote their small societies out of existence? It is a time of worry, confusion and suspicion.
We're not cutting him out. We've no grudge against him. Well, he has 3 and 4 times his income compared to the small farmer. Where is the small farmer going? If that small farmer is going into something unknown.
Have you any fears about this amalgamation?
Well, I'd say that it would be a good thing, like in the long run.
Why?
With rising cost, like, and we get a better price for milk, let's say. We join up, you know.
You'll get a better milk price?
Yeah, get a better milk price.
Why do you think that the big combine, when you go in with Charleville, why will they be able to get you a better price than...
Well, I said I can carry on in a bigger scale and with a more modern machinery, like, and there'll be less cost, I'd say. Cost won't be as high.
Have you any fears about the amalgamation?
Well, I'd say not, you know. I'd say it will get through in the long run.
My feeling about it is that we're entering the unknown at the moment. Like we just don't know what we're facing, and I suppose farmers are traditionally suspicious of making any real progress in that direction.
Amalgamation, of course, is, I mean, even when it takes place, it is a gradual development, and nobody is going to be hurt. I mean, there's nothing going to be wiped out in that manner, and local co-ops, they still have to work away to a certain extent, and for example, you have a store here now. What difference, to make no difference whatsoever.
Even take the mats that came on and took the place of the fairs, like. I said to 19.
Yeah, they were very successful.
Yeah, that's right, it says 19 advancing.
The farmers have the same facilities that they had always, you know, as regards credit.
Absolutely, yes. I'm prepared to stand over that, because that is one thing, like we have insisted. I think Mr. O'Loughlin is well aware of the conditions that exist here in Askew and our way of life here. And we, both the chairman, committee and on it, and committee. We have discussed that, and we do not intend to change that one iota except for the better.
It's quite obvious in these days that the small society, through no fault of its own, just does not command the resources to be able to service the farmer into the future in the way which he will need and which he deserves. It is only on the basis of societies big enough and strong enough to command the resources that the proper service will be given to farmers in the future. And this obviously applies more particularly to the small farmer than to the big farmer.
Well, amalgamation was never intended, and is not now intended, to undermine the position of the small farmer. The small farmer should see in amalgamation more support for his own efforts, which would enable him to plan his future more hopefully and with greater confidence.
When the notion of amalgamating the creameries here in the Golden Vale area was suggested from Charleville,
Yes.
at first you didn't think that was a good idea?
I was very much opposed to it. You see, I had always a hope that that local government in Ireland would develop, such as same as the parish councils or the village communes in Europe, and because I felt that the intellect of the country was becoming dormant, and that the people had lost all energy, and they were looking to do nothing but looking to the government or county council or something, instead of doing things themselves. And with the taking over of the creameries, I felt that there would be less hope than ever of that. That the only thing, the only rural development, local development that was, would disappear, and that another step would be taken in centralisation, and that. So I was very much opposed to it, but after a while I began to realise that in the change of times and with the rapidly increasing costs, that it would be impossible to maintain the small creamery societies as they were.
Some of the 22 societies involved are likely to hold on to their separate existence. Cantoha, for example, with its large poultry business. Bovabree in County Cork has recently built a new creamery and put in automatic plant. This is their rationalisation on their own local scale. They too may resist amalgamation. Each society must decide for itself. Some of them see the dangers of trying to go it alone.
Somebody that you don't want even to go with. You see yourselves here, I think we had a lot of the suppliers and shareholders. They visited the Golden Vale. They saw the new buildings, the amount of money it cost to put up those buildings. It's all there. But if you are put in with somebody else, if you're put in with somebody in Listowel or somebody in Limerick, you haven't the factory at the present moment. The factory will have to be built. And who will build the factory? You can be sure you'll build a factory, or you contribute to building it.
The trouble is this, you see, the creameries have a fixed income. They live on a government subsidy. Their income is fixed, and every day the costs of production are rising. And naturally, when you have a fixed income and the costs are rising day by day, it must come to an end. Sooner or later, no matter how long they carry on, the local societies will have to give up.
It may happen that a creamery will close a certain aspect of its business. For instance, a small creamery may stop separating milk. But that doesn't mean that the cooperative movement, or indeed that the business of the cooperative movement disappears from that area. Doesn't mean to say that we are going to give up all operations. There's probably a store connected with this. The objective will be to make that store even bigger and greater and of more service to the farmers in the area. And one would feel in this way that a greater number of people will in fact be employed.
We'll probably wind up we won't have any job, because you have 22 creameries involved in the merger. Now something in the region of between 800 and 1,000 workers. So somebody I think will be without a job. And I think there is no other way of looking at it.
Have Charleville given any guarantees of relocation? In other words, that they would promise you a job, but not necessarily here, perhaps in Charleville.
Nothing that we have had done.
How would that affect you, Michael? You're an older
It would
man.
affect me, of course. It would. I'd find myself a bit old for travelling. Just travelling to Charleville, you know. I think be all for that, you know.
So even if they offered you a job, you wouldn't be inclined to?
I wouldn't be inclined to, you know.
And what's the union doing about this possible redundancy? Has it made any representations to the bosses in Charleville?
It has made representations to the people in Golden Vale, all right, but I think the issues are kind of vague as far as we know anyway, like, but the issue is still vague. They have a kind of a guarantee given that there won't be any redundancy, but we can't see it from that point of view.
As regards the redundancy question, that has been, we have discussed that already at committee level and with the management of Golden Vale. And if there were redundancy, I feel that there'd be a dropping back in our present standards. And that is something, listener, that we are not going to stand for. Like, in other words, that we want, if we're out, as the chairman said, to recommend amalgamation to you. And as such, we're recommending it because we feel that it is in the best interest of everyone concerned. Workers, suppliers, and all.
Before we'll amalgamate it all, there are certain guarantees we'll have to get. We're not going to go into it blindfolded.
What guarantees?
Well, skim milk, we're promised 5p a gallon for our skim. We're getting 3p at the moment. But what guarantees we'll get for our new milk, I don't know. I mean, we're back practically a penny halfpenny to 2p a gallon this year, from last year.
I'd be all for it anyhow. I expect it to be a better price for milk and things like that. I'd be all for it.
Do you think there's any disadvantage?
I wouldn't think so.
With the common market as coming up, I'm afraid the weak unit is out.
There's no time to be sentimental.
No time to be sentimental. No. It's not easy for people, as you know, country people, to turn around and give up. But really put their fathers and their grandfathers before them. And
by God, there's a problem against it.
I'm sorry?
That change, if this amalgamation, there will be a change, I suppose, all right.
What kind of change?
My God, but I know that there'll be you couldn't, the changes that there'll be, I suppose, less, there'll be any surprise. This will be on an intake station anyway.
You don't think it's being taken over by big business or anything like that?
No, I wouldn't say so. Sure, I mean, it's the farmers really that would be running it.
One doesn't expect a small or even a large farmer in Ireland to have any sophisticated knowledge of managerial or production techniques. How then can the average co-op member hope to retain any real control over his co-op when control of that co-op is in effect exercised by technicians and managers perhaps 40 or 50 miles away, people whom he does not know and never meets?
Well, what this refers to presumably is the larger scale society that may result from amalgamation of societies. The IOS sees this as a difficulty. Obviously, the larger a business gets, a cooperative business, the more remote it seems to go from the individual farmer. In order to guard against this situation, in the rationalization proposals which have been issued by the IAOS, there is provision made that in the local areas, advisory committees are established.
The advisory committee will be more or less the same as the existing creamery committees. They will be appointed or elected by the shareholders in a particular creamery area, and this creamery committee will then elect representatives to the Central Cooperative Committee, and the shareholders will endorse their selection. And in addition, executives from the central organisation will attend the monthly meeting of these regional committees or creamery committees, and will receive from the committees a report on the particular area and any proposals, problems, at the same time give back to the committees for sending back to their shareholders what is going on at the central organisation of the central cooperative society.
We must remember that that amalgamation doesn't mean the sweeping away of the creamery. You see, the creamery will be still there, and until the committee, which will become an advisory committee to the central committee at Golden Vale, until they and the shareholders agree. Now, if they that can be a very long time. To understand, but it is up to them in the discussion between them and the central committee at Golden Vale, you see, when such an eventuality might come.
Already the small farmers in one of your creameries, and perhaps more in the future, have said no, or at least a provisional no, to the amalgamation scheme. What will happen? Any creameries which finally opt out and say we will not.
At this stage, a creamery is staying out of any system of rationalisation, whether it's a voluntary system or whether it's a system that may be introduced by the Department of Agriculture or by the IOS. I don't think they can stand out in isolation for too long.
What sanctions could be used against?
Well, it's not for me to say what sanctions might be used, but after all, there is quite a big financial support coming from the Exchequer towards the dairy industry.
It is principally to make sure that international food cartels will not move in on the farmers of this country, that we see the necessity that the farmers themselves must have a fully integrated large-scale business acting on their behalf. What we do feel, if our societies remain small, they will not be able to face competition, and they can be picked off one by one eventually by international cartels of this kind with tremendous finance behind them. But what we want to do is to get the farmers in this country to build up their own societies to a size and with adequate finance that they will be able to compete completely with any cartel that may be around. That is the objective, the whole objective indeed of the cooperative movement. Quite frankly, the cooperative societies are business societies. They have to exist under extremely competitive situations. They must be as conscious of the profit motive as any private business.
Charleville is deeply conscious of the profit motive. Already Golden Vale Food Products Limited is big business. Back in 1943, 11 co-ops jointly set up a proposed cheese factory there. This was successful, and the enterprise grew and diversified. Expanded, for instance, into the business of milk drying, using a plant as up-to-date and ambitious as that of any privately owned industry. And even into dairy engineering, successfully building stainless steel tanks for the industry in Ireland and abroad. Golden Vale realizes that the problems which face the cooperative farmers today are very much the same as those faced by their grandfathers 80 years ago. The only difference is one of scale.
When the cooperative movement started in Ireland, it was a movement of necessity. At that stage, the vital thing for farmers was their economic salvation. At that stage, they had looked to politics to solve, up to that stage, they had looked to politics to solve their problems. When Plunkett started his ideas of cooperation, he put before the farmers that their welfare was in their own hands, and that the means by which this would be achieved was organization through cooperative movement.
In the next few months, the old and the new methods will be closely examined by the shareholders. Old-style cheese making at Feenagh is very different to the big processed cheese operation at Charleville. Can both survive? The farmers will meet to discuss the proposed amalgamation, and above all they will vote on proposals that vitally affect their future. Much of their talk will be about the hard questions of economic survival. If the farmers choose to build and support larger and impersonal structures to meet today's economic demands, then they must also make sure that the real meaning of cooperation isn't forgotten. They must make sure that the benefits will flow back to their own local areas. They must make sure that their new giant co-op doesn't become simply a business empire. They must make sure that their advisory committees are something more than window dressing. and they might realise that those advisory committees could well use a new prosperity in local areas to ensure that the cooperative movement returns to its half-forgotten social objectives of community loyalty and mutual help. A German economist once told Horace Plunkett's assistant, "You Irish, you can conspire, but you cannot combine." Conspiracy is still a word in our vocabulary, but parishes like Glencolmkill in County Donegal show that combination can and does work. In the Golden Vale, the material profits from rationalisation could well be used for community purposes, provided that the farmers insist on being the masters of their own co-ops. Or will they prefer to be managed from above and cause Sir Horace Plunkett to turn in his grave? The choice is theirs.